Right. So now let's look at how to write chapter 3, which is the methodology of the dissertation. So in the name itself, it is clear that it is about how you are going to or how you have undertaken your research study, which is all about what are the methods that you have used to gather data and to analyze them and to interpret, and all these things comes under this third chapter of your dissertation, which is the methodology. So moving forward, what is it? So like I said, it actually has to explain how you have undertaken the research study. And it has to explain why you have chosen certain research methodologies, research methods in order to undertake your research study. So it also has to talk about the quality, the rigor of your study, the reliability and validity of your research as well. So these are the basic contents that you should include in your chapter 3, right? So like in every other chapter, you need to give a chapter introduction and a chapter summary, and then here you can see the subheadings as listed in this slide, right? So let's have a look at them one by one. So, in the chapter introduction, you have to say what this chapter consists of. And also another important thing is now you can have a look back to your research problem and your objectives in this chapter. So you can briefly mention your research questions again in this chapter, and that in order to achieve these research objectives and these questions, this is the methodology that will be used in this chapter, right? And then you can explain the purpose of the methodology chapter, which is to do what? To give an explanation of the different methods that you have undertaken in terms of conducting this research study, right? And then you need to give justifications also as to why and how this research methodology is facilitating the fulfillment of your research purpose, right? And then, so now we are looking at the different contents that you have to include in this chapter. So starting off with the research philosophy or the paradigm. So if this is a qualitative study, the research philosophy would be interpretivism, depending on your topic and your research problem, right? So there are different philosophies that a researcher will follow in terms of undertaking a particular research study. So what you have to do is you have to read literature on research philosophy and paradigm and give a definition according to the existing literature, and then give a citation as to what research philosophy is all about. So there are different types of philosophies, right? Positivism, interpretivism, and pragmatism. So you can also give a slightly brief definition for these different philosophies as well. And then you have to give a citation for to recognize who has found those definitions and who has reported them. And then you need to say, out of these three different philosophies, what is my research philosophy? What is the research philosophy that underpins my research investigation? So let's say if it's interpretivism, you can say based on the nature of the research problem, or based on the topic and the questions, and the requirement based on the type of data required. The present research has employed the interpretivism research philosophy. So likewise, you have to give what you have chosen and why you chose it, right? So you have to give justifications as to why you have chosen the research philosophy that you have chosen for your study. So that is how you should actually write each and every aspect under the research methodology chapter, right? So then we have the research approach. So similarly, we know that there are three types of research approaches: deductive, inductive, and abductive. So what you can do is you can write what research approach is all about, give a citation, and then you can say there are three types as to these: deductive, inductive, and abductive, and you can briefly explain what these three approaches are. And then you can say, for my study, for this study, we have specifically chosen this particular approach because of these reasons. Give the justification, right? So that is how you should write all these aspects. Similarly, the research design. So there are three different types of designs that one can use, right? The quantitative, quali, or the mixed method. So you have to justify, again, say clearly, but you have chosen what research design is best appropriate for your study and why, right? You have to justify your selection of the research design with academic and also practical references based on your study, right? And then we are coming to population and sample. So define your target population, and then out of that, what is your sample, what is your sample element, and then what is the sample size, and then unit of analysis. All these things comes under population and sampling, and also most importantly, the sampling strategy, right? We know that there are two types of sampling strategies: probability and non-probability. But for qualitative studies, normally we take non-probability sampling techniques such as purposive, snowballing, judgmental, which is also purposive, um, and convenience sampling, right? So out of these different sampling strategies, what you have chosen and why you have chosen. And then even your sample size, since if it is a qualitative study, you can go for 10 to 15 to 25 sample. So you have to justify why you have stopped from interviewing 10 or 15 participants, and why your sample size was 10 or 15, right? So you need to give justifications. And then you have to also talk about how you have chosen your participants, which is the sampling technique. But then again, what are the criteria that you have used to select and end up with the participants that you have interviewed? So that is about the sampling. And then data collection method. So obviously we know we have to do a primary data collection, which is all about collecting first-hand data, right? So for qualitative studies, there are different types of data collection methods, and for quantitative, there are different types of methods. So mainly for qualitative, we can do interviews, focus groups, observations, or document analysis, right? So basically, normally, widely used method is actually interviews or focus groups. For interviews, normally we know that we have to prepare an interview guide to support the interview throughout the questioning from the participants. So you'd have to prepare an interview guide based on your research questions, because those are the questions that you're going to get answers for by undertaking the study. So these interview guides, with the use of interview guides, the interviews become semi-structured because you have a set of questions to ask from your participants, right? So your data collection method will be semi-structured in-depth interviews when you're using an interview guide. So you have to say there are different types of data collection methods for qualitative data, such as interviews, focus groups, and etc. And then for this study, I am going to use, or I have used, you can't use the term I, but you can say interviews have been used in this study because of these reasons, maybe to collect in-depth data or to get insights from the participants that are of subjective nature, right? So likewise, you have to justify why you have selected interviews. And then about the data analysis. Since we have collected data of qualitative nature, there are three types. There are different techniques that you can use. Again, widely used is the thematic analysis. So here you can use the Braun and Clark's 6-step method, where you have to first get familiar with the data and then review them, reread and create the codes and get the themes, and then finally include them in the report. So you can follow those 6 steps to analyze your data under the thematic analysis. So that is how you analyze your data for qualitative studies. And for quantitative, you can use different softwares like SPSS and all. And in terms of the ethical considerations, you have to say that you have received the verbal or written consent from the participants, and the participants have a clear understanding about this study, and their names will not be revealed under any circumstance, and their data, the insights that they have provided, will be kept in confidentiality, and these recordings of your interviews will only be shared with you and your supervisor maybe, and that's all. So that is about the ethical considerations. So you need to add this into your chapter as well. And then in terms of the rigor of the study in a qualitative research, there are 4 things that you have to talk about, such as the credibility and transferability, and there are 2 other aspects that you have to cover. So you can talk about those aspects as well, as in how you're going to make sure that these aspects are covered and that the data that you have collected are of good quality and that they're reliable, right? So you have to have a section for the rigor of your study as well. And then finally, the chapter summary, where you can briefly highlight on what you have talked about in this chapter. And then, like in the previous chapters, you can have a sentence connecting to the next chapter, which is your chapter 4, discussion, findings and discussion. So have that flow in between all of your chapters, right? So with that, I will show you an example of a methodology chapter. So here you can see this is how you write the chapter. Like I said, you can briefly mention what you're trying to explore in this particular research, and then mainly highlight what this chapter is all about and how it is supporting the accomplishment of the research questions. And according to the purpose of the study, there are 3 types, as in exploratory, descriptive, and hypothesis testing. So for a qualitative study, it is going to be exploratory, because obviously you're trying to explore something that is previously unknown to yourself and even to the other authors. So you have to always mention these different types, and you have to have a proper citation, and then you have to say what you have chosen and why you have chosen it for this particular study. So likewise, this is an example, as in with the inclusion of all these different subheadings that I explained earlier, right? And so you can also add this study context, which is about the environmental setting that you're going to do this research study. So for many of the Sri Lankan students, it will be Sri Lanka. So even in this particular research study, we have interviewed consumer activists from Sri Lanka. So the study context is going to be Sri Lanka. And there are 2 types of study context, actually, non-contrived and the contrived setting, which is about you undertaking the research in the natural setting, as in what we normally do, talking to the participants. And then there are research or data collections that take place in labs and in artificial environments as well. So that is about it. And then the geographic location is actually where you specifically what is the geographic community that you're interviewing your participants from, right? So here you can see I have only taken participants from the Colombo district of Sri Lanka. And you have to also provide a justification as to why you have limit your geographic location only to Colombo, Sri Lanka as well, right? And then the data collection. So similar format is there, the methodological literature and why you have chosen it, and the justification and sampling strategy, the size strategy, and then unit of analysis is definitely going to be individuals, right? Because you're not going to collect data from companies, but it's going to be individuals for many of your studies as well. And even in this study, we have interviewed Sri Lankan consumer activists who are individuals, right? And then the instrument of data collection is actually, like I said, it is the interview guide, right? The interviews, which will be supported by an interview guide. So there are also three types of interviews, as in structured, semi-structured, and unstructured interviews. So you can briefly define what those are and why you have specifically chosen the semi-structured interviews for this particular study. Maybe because of the flexibility of this type, and you can have probing questions to be asked from the research participants. And also importantly, you should talk about how the interviews proceeded, right? Right. So read these things and have an understanding. It's about how you have conducted the interviews. So you can start from identifying the participants to getting their consent and to getting a interview date and time fixed. And even the language that you have used must be written here. And then how you have recorded and where did you record it and all these things and how it all started. Started off with some rapport building questions where you got to collect some demographic data from the participants, and then gradually to the research main questions in order to cover your research question. And then the time horizon, it's also about when you have collected the data. So it's going to be cross-sectional for y'all because you're only collecting data for once, right? Y'all are not doing longitudinal studies. That means over time you will be collecting data from a same set of participants. And you can highlight how many how many minutes you have spent on an interview and what happened basically, and the language, and why, if you're using Sinhala, your mother tongue, you have to justify why you have Sinhala regardless of using English. And if you have used English, again, why English? Um, and you have to make sure that the language is not a barrier in terms of getting insights from your participants. So this is the data analyzing the steps that I told you about, introduced by Brown and Clark, and you can get more recent citations, more recent articles from these two people on the Google Scholar. So you have to follow and explain how you did go through these steps. How you have prepared the data and how did you do the thematic analysis. So this is about how you actually analyze your data. So you have to analyze your data following these 6 steps, right? So you have to first get a familiarization with the data. That means you are doing the interviews and you have to get them recorded and listen to it several times in order to get familiar with those data. And then following it, you have to get it transcribed, you have to get the audio recordings written word to word or typed word to word on a piece of paper or on a Word document. Nowadays, there are softwares that does it, but you have to sit and go through it. Otherwise, it has some, it'll give you some mistakes in your transcript. And then if you have done the interviews in Sinhala, you will have to translate your transcript into English as well, because the analysis happens in English. And then the analyzing process begins, where you start off with creating codes, and then going through all these codes and finding similar themes. You can come up with your findings of the study and the themes and the sub-themes and all these things. So it is actually the process of analyzing the data. So this is the rigor of study, as I earlier mentioned. For qualitative studies, how you make sure that it's reliable and its validity is through these few aspects, right? The credibility, dependability, transferability, and the conformability. So read about these different aspects and mention how you have ensured credibility in your study, how you have ensured transferability of your study, and the other two aspects as well. And then finally, the chapter summary, where you have to include a very brief explanation as to what this chapter was, and then look forward into the next chapter. So that is about the methodology chapter, and hope it was useful for you.